Hey there, and welcome to the Deep Dive, where we take a closer look at fascinating topics that are shaping our world. Today, we're diving deep into the world of hip-hop. We're going to be unpacking a podcast episode called The Evolution and Impact of Hip-Hop. And trust me, this journey is wild. We're talking about a genre that went from basement parties in the Bronx to a global cultural phenomenon. I mean, how did that even happen?
What's fascinating here is that hip-hop didn't just appear out of nowhere. It emerged from a very specific context. The Bronx in the 1970s. You had a community facing some real challenges, economic hardship, social unrest.
Yeah.
But from that struggle came this explosion of creativity. It's a classic example of art emerging from adversity, wouldn't you say?
Totally. It makes you think about how limitations can sometimes breed innovation. So we're talking about the birthplace of hip-hop. What were those early days like?
Imagine this. It's the 70s. You're in the Bronx, and you hear about this DJ named Kool Herc throwing these legendary block parties. He's got 2 turntables, and he's isolating these instrumental breaks in funk and soul records, what we now call break beats, extending them, and people are going wild.
Hold on, break beats. So he's basically taking these short instrumental sections and looping them. Was that a thing back then?
Not really. This was revolutionary. Herc created the space for people to dance longer, and it's where b-boying or breakdancing as we know it really took off. But it wasn't just about the dancing. It was about the energy, the community, the feeling of something new being born.
Okay, I can already see why he's considered a pioneer. But it wasn't just DJ Kool Herc, right? The podcast mentioned other names like Grandmaster Flash and Afrika Bambaataa.
Absolutely. Each of these DJs brought their own innovations to the scene. Grandmaster Flash, for example, developed incredible techniques like scratching and beat juggling. This wasn't just mixing. This was using the turntables as an instrument, transforming the sound in ways that had never been done before. And these innovations weren't happening in isolation. Graffiti artists were tagging the city with their visual expressions, and b-boys and b-girls were pushing the boundaries of dance-forming crews and battling each other.
It sounds like the Bronx was a hotbed of artistic experimentation. It's amazing how all these elements, MCing, DJing, graffiti, breakdancing, came together to form this vibrant culture.
Exactly. And then you have Afrika Bambaataa, who was not just a DJ, but a true visionary. He saw hip-hop as a movement for peace, unity, and upliftment. He formed the Zulu Nation, a collective of DJs, artists, and boys promoting these positive values. This was about more than just music. It was about community self-expression and using art to create something positive in a challenging environment.
It's really inspiring to see how, even in those early days, hip-hop had this social consciousness, this drive to build something better.
It's inherent to the genre, I think. It's about speaking your truth, sharing your experiences, and connecting with others through rhythm and rhyme.
Okay, so these pioneers set the stage, but things really started to take off in the 80s, right? The podcast mentioned the rise of groups like Run DMC, Public Enemy, and the Sugar Hill Gang. What was it about this era that propelled hip-hop into the mainstream?
Well, a few things happen. First, you have groups like the Sugar Hill Gang with Rapper's Delight bursting onto the scene. It was the first hip-hop track to hit the Billboard Top 40, introducing the genre to a much wider audience. People were hearing rapping on the radio for the first time, and it was catchy, it was fresh, and it was unlike anything they'd heard before.
It must have been mind-blowing for people who had never heard anything like it before.
Right. And then you have Run DMC, who were like a force of nature. They had this hard-hitting, rock-influenced sound that appealed to both hip-hop fans and rock fans. They collaborated with Aerosmith on a remake of Walk This Way, which became a massive hit and really blurred the lines between genres. It showed that hip-hop wasn't just some underground phenomenon. It was a force to be reckoned with.
It's interesting how they were able to bridge those two worlds, rock and hip-hop, which must have seemed totally separate at the time. What do you think it was about their sound that resonated so widely?
Well, for one thing, they stripped away some of the more melodic elements of early hip-hop and focused on these really powerful driving beats. They used rock guitar riffs and samples, but they kept that essential hip-hop groove. It was raw, it was energetic, and it was impossible to ignore.
And of course, they had that iconic look, the Adidas tracksuits, the Kangol hats, the gold chains.
Exactly. They created a visual style that was just as impactful as their music. They were cool, confident, and they represented this new generation that was coming of age.
So Run DMC brought the rock influence, but the podcast also mentioned the impact of technology on hip-hop's evolution. What were some of the key technological advancements during this era?
This is where it gets really interesting. Drum machines and samplers became widely accessible in the 80s, and they completely changed the game. Suddenly, producers could create these complex, layered beats without needing a full band.
Can you give me an example of how this impacted the sound of hip-hop?
Think about the Beastie Boys. Their sound was built on sampling, taking pieces of other songs and incorporating them into their own tracks. They used everything from funk to rock to jazz, creating these wild sonic collages that were totally unique.
So they were like musical DJs, but instead of using turntables, they were using samplers to mix and manipulate sounds.
Exactly. And this opened up a whole new world of possibilities for hip-hop producers. They could experiment with different textures, create their own unique sonic palettes, and push the boundaries of what a hip-hop beat could sound like.
It's amazing how something as seemingly technical as a drum machine or a sampler could have such a profound impact on an art form.
It shows how technology can be a tool for creativity, for pushing boundaries, and for shaping the evolution of entire genre.
It sounds like the 80s were a pivotal time for hip-hop, both musically and technologically. But the podcast also talked about how hip-hop became a powerful platform for social commentary. What were some of the key voices and messages that emerged during this era?
This is where we see hip-hop really flexing its muscles as a tool for social change. Groups like Public Enemy and NWA weren't afraid to tackle tough issues head-on. They rapped about systemic racism, police brutality, poverty, and the realities of life in marginalized communities.
It must have been a powerful moment to hear those voices, especially for people who felt like their stories weren't being told in the mainstream media.
Absolutely. Public Enemy, for example, with their politically charged lyrics and their militant image, really challenged the status quo. They forced people to confront uncomfortable truths about race and inequality in America.
And NWA, with their raw, unflinching portrayal of life in Compton, sparked a lot of controversy, right?
Yes, they definitely pushed buttons. Their music was seen as a threat by some. They faced censorship and criticism. But for many, especially young people in marginalized communities, NWA's music was a voice of truth, a reflection of their own experiences.
So hip-hop was evolving musically, it was breaking into the mainstream, and it was becoming this powerful force for social commentary. It seems like things were really heating up in the hip-hop world. What happened next?
Well, the late 80s and early 90s are often referred to as the golden age of hip-hop. It was a period of incredible creativity, diversity, and innovation. You had artists like Tupac Shakur, the Notorious B.I.G. Nas, A Tribe Called Quest, just to name a few, who were pushing the boundaries of lyrical complexity storytelling and musical experimentation.
Wow, that's a lot of iconic names in one era. What do you think it was about that specific time period that fostered so much creativity?
It's hard to say for sure, but I think it was a combination of factors. You had the groundwork laid by those early pioneers, you had the technological advancements that opened up new sonic possibilities, and you had this growing sense of confidence and ambition within the hip-hop community. Artists were realizing the power of their voices, and they weren't afraid to experiment and take risks.
And each region was developing its own unique sound, right? The podcast mentioned the East Coast versus West Coast rivalry?
Yes, that was a defining element of this era. On the East Coast, you had artists like Nas and the Notorious B.I.G., who were known for their gritty, realism, complex wordplay, and hard-hitting beats. On the West Coast, you had artists like Tupac and Dr. Dre, who brought a more melodic, funk-infused sound.
That's right. The podcast specifically called out Dr. Dre and his creation of G-Funk. What exactly is G-Funk and how did it change the sound of hip-hop?
G-Funk, which stands for Gangsta Funk, was a game changer. Dr. Dre took elements of funk, those deep bass lines, those melodic synthesizers, and blended them with the hard-hitting beats of West Coast hip-hop. He created this smoother, more laid-back sound that was both catchy and menacing.
Can you give me an example of a classic G-Funk track?
Think of Snoop Dogg's Gin and Juice. That's G-Funk at its finest. You've got that infectious groove, that smooth flow, and those iconic synthesizer melodies. It was a sound that dominated the airwaves in the early 90s and influenced countless artists.
It's funny how even today you can hear those G-Funk influences in a lot of contemporary hip-hop. It's a sound that's really stood the test of time.
Absolutely. Dr. Dre's innovations had a lasting impact on the soundscape of hip-hop, and his influence can still be felt today.
So we've seen how hip-hop exploded in the U.S., but what about the rest of the world? When did hip-hop start to gain a global following?
Well, hip-hop always had an international presence, but it really started to take off globally in the late 90s and early 2000s. Artists like Jay-Z, Eminem, and Missy Elliott were gaining worldwide recognition. And hip-hop culture, the music, the fashion, the dance was spreading rapidly through the internet and global media.
That makes sense. The late 90s and early 2000s were a time when the internet was really starting to connect people from all over the world.
Exactly. And this global interconnectedness played a huge role in hip-hop's expansion. Suddenly people in Europe, Asia, Africa, and South America had access to this music and this culture that was so different from their own. And they embraced it. They started creating their own hip-hop scenes, blending American influences with their own local sounds and styles.
It's incredible to think how this genre that started in the streets of the Bronx could resonate with people from all over the world. What do you think it is about hip-hop that makes it so universally appealing?
Well, at its core, hip-hop is about storytelling, about self-expression, about connecting with others through rhythm and rhyme. It's a genre that gives voice to the voiceless, that challenges authority, that speaks to the struggles and triumphs of everyday life. And those themes are universal. No matter where you're from, no matter what language you speak, you can relate to those experiences.
That's so true. It's about that shared human experience, those common threads that connect us all, even across cultural boundaries.
Exactly. And that's one of the reasons why hip-hop has been so successful in transcending geographical boundaries. It's a genre that speaks to the heart of the human experience.
So we've gone from block parties in the Bronx to a global phenomenon. It's an incredible journey. But the story doesn't end there, right? What's next for hip-hop? How is it continuing to evolve and adapt in the digital age?
Well, this is where things get really interesting. The rise of social media and digital platforms like YouTube, SoundCloud, and TikTok has completely changed the game for hip-hop artists. They no longer need record labels to reach a global audience. They can connect directly with fans, build their own brands, and distribute their music independently.
It's like the power has shifted from the gatekeepers of the music industry to the artists themselves.
Exactly, and this has led to an explosion of creativity and diversity within the hip-hop landscape. You have artists from all over the world blending genres, experimenting with new sounds, and pushing the boundaries of what hip-hop can be.
It's exciting to think about all the possibilities. But it's not just about technology, right? Hip-hop has always been about more than just music. It's a culture, a lifestyle, a movement. How is that cultural aspect of hip-hop continuing to evolve and influence society?
That's a great question. Hip-hop has always been deeply intertwined with fashion, dance, and visual art. And those connections are still strong today. Streetwear, which has its roots in hip-hop culture, is now a global fashion phenomenon. Dance styles like breaking, popping, and locking continue to evolve and inspire dancers all over the world. And hip-hop aesthetics are influencing everything from advertising to film to fine art.
It's amazing to see how hip-hop has permeated mainstream culture in so many ways. It's no longer just a subculture. It's a force that's shaping global trends and influencing how we dress, how we dance, how we see the world.
And let's not forget about the social and political impact of hip-hop. It's still a powerful platform for raising awareness, challenging injustice, and inspiring change.
Absolutely. There are so many artists today who are using their platforms to speak out against racism, sexism, homophobia, poverty, police brutality, and a whole range of social issues.
And it's not just about lyrics anymore. It's about community activism, philanthropy, and using their influence to make a tangible difference in the world.
It's inspiring to see how artists are using their voices and their platforms to create positive change.
Totally. It's a reminder that hip-hop has always been about more than just beats and rhymes. It's about community empowerment and making your voice heard. And that's what makes it such a powerful force even today.
Okay, so we've covered a ton of ground here. We've seen how hip-hop went from a localized movement in the Bronx to a global cultural powerhouse. We've talked about its roots, its evolution, its impact on music, fashion, dance, and even social consciousness. It's been an incredible journey. But where does it go from here? What's next for hip-hop?
That's the big question, isn't it? What's fascinating is that hip-hop has always been about pushing boundaries, innovating, and reinventing itself.
So it's not going to just stand still, right?
Definitely not. And that's
Yeah.
what makes it so exciting. If we think about the role technology has played in its evolution, from those early drum machines and samplers to today's digital platforms, it's clear that hip-hop will continue to adapt and evolve alongside technology.
I mean, just look at how artists are using artificial intelligence and virtual reality to create mind-blowing experiences, like a whole new frontier.
Exactly. And as global interconnectedness continues to grow, we can expect to see even more cross-cultural collaborations. Blending hip-hop with sounds and styles from all over the world, the possibilities are endless.
I love how hip-hop has this ability to bridge cultures and connect people from different backgrounds.
It truly is a universal language. And as long as there are stories to tell, experiences to share, and injustices to challenge, hip-hop will continue to be a powerful voice for self-expression and social change.
So for you listening, here's something to think about. Now that you've seen how hip-hop evolved, what do you think is the future of this dynamic art form?
Will it continue to be a force for social change? Will it continue to push musical boundaries?
What new innovations and collaborations will shape the sound and look of hip-hop in the years to come?
It's an exciting time to be a fan of hip-hop, and we can't wait to see what the future holds.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of hip-hop. It's been a blast breaking down this iconic genre. From its humble beginnings to its global dominance, hip-hop's journey is nothing short of remarkable.
It's a story of creativity, innovation, and resilience, all set to a pulsating beat.
And it shows no signs of slowing down. So as we wrap up our deep dive, let's leave you with one final thought.
Hip-hop is more than just music. It's a cultural force that reflects the times we live in.
It gives voice to the voiceless, challenges the status quo, and pushes us to think differently.
So keep listening, keep exploring, and keep the spirit of hip-hop alive.
Thanks for joining us on this incredible journey. We'll catch you next time on The Deep Dive.